Welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about the plans that Tooele County Emergency Management has developed and why we need them, why you need to read them, and why it makes a difference to you as leaders in the community. First, we will talk about planning. Next, we will discuss what the whole community is and why it is important in the emergency management realm. SEMP is an acronym for Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, which is the main plan we are going to be discussing today. It is the foundation of all other plans for emergency management. We will talk about when it is used, why it is used, and how you use it. Next, we will talk about ESFs, which are emergency support functions, which is the framework of how an EOC is organized by function. Next, we will talk about the things that make a SEMP better and why we want to make it better. Then we will go briefly over each of the annexes to the SEMP, which are plans themselves about different areas, and the ESFs that have specific needs and issues that are addressed in each specific annex. Why do you plan in your job? Why do we plan a trip? Why do we plan our grocery shopping trips? Why do we not just all go do whatever we want whenever we want? When we plan, it helps events and issues usually go more in favor of how we want them to go. When accomplished properly, planning provides a methodical way to engage the whole community in thinking through the life cycle of a potential crisis, determining required capabilities, and establishing a framework for roles and responsibilities. It shapes how a community envisions and shares a desired outcome, and selects effective ways to achieve it, and communicates the expected results. So having a plan helps our community and all those that need to be involved in an event. It helps them know what things need to be handled and how they should be handled, so they go better than just wishing they may go better. Having a plan doesn't guarantee a perfect outcome, but it shapes a more favorable response and a recovery toward how we expect the outcome to be. Planning isn't about the document. It is about what we want to get out of the process of the planning and the relationship we build because of the planning. Yes, plans are a whole bunch of words that tell us what to do, but it isn't a script that should be followed exactly. It is about processes and principles that will enable response in a more effective way. Effective plans have goals and objectives with actions that are needed to achieve those objectives. The same things happen for disasters. It isn't about what needs to be done because something comes up and is in the way. It is about relationships and processes that are in place that help what needs to be done better and more effectively. Success occurs when everyone knows their roles and understands how they fit into the plan and how to execute their part in it. Planning shouldn't happen in a silo where only a few people know what the goals and objectives are, and what process will work best, and what relationships should be made. It should involve the whole community. This is a principle that has been proven time and time again. When we involve the whole community, it makes for a resilient community, and recovery happens organically and better because people have a stake in being part of the process of helping the community be more resilient. When we involve the whole community, we not only realize all the needs, but we leverage resources, approaches, people, and partners who can help address those needs, especially in a time of disaster. So, what makes up the whole community? It involves everyone in the community, from government to organizations who can assist, to the businesses in our community who know and understand the community with a different perspective. It is groups of people, such as those with access and functional needs, or those of certain cultures or faiths. The whole community invites all types of people from all walks of life to have input on how a community should handle a disaster before one, during one, and after one. Of course, there are roles each plays, but also each has a say and becomes a stakeholder in the welfare and resilience of the community. Each group of a community has a different perspective of the community, and each knows the different needs of the people of that group. So it is helpful to let the community know they can become a better, more informed community by empowering them with a voice of what makes a more resilient community and what planning should look like for a community. Also, involving the whole community pools resources that can help when a community government just cannot address all of the needs, especially after a disaster. Working as a whole community has so many benefits. Working together brings a more sophisticated understanding of a community's needs and capabilities and pools efforts and resources, not only for government agencies, but also for many private and nonprofit organizations. This is where the SEMP comes in. When we want to make sure we involve everyone, and look at the whole community, we make a comprehensive plan. And we make plans with them in mind as survivors and as resources for recovery. A SEMP looks at the possible needs of the community, and with the help of the whole community partners' assets, they can be leveraged for survivors and the community with both the traditional and non traditional partners. The SEMP is guidance for overall policy, planning, and procedures for actions related to an all hazards approach to emergencies and disasters. It talks about the planning process and what needs to happen in the preparedness stage so that response can be met in efficient ways and that a community can recover according to principles and frameworks that have been proven to help communities become more sustainable after disasters. It talks about continuity, although there is a whole separate plan for continuity, and it discusses recovery planning and directs participants to the disaster recovery plan, as more in-depth detail is in that plan. The SEMP basically defines who does what, when, where, and how in order to mitigate, prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the effects of natural, technological, and human-caused hazards. Here's a picture of the cover and the description of what is inside the SEMP. Basically, there's an introduction that describes the purpose and scope and who maintains the plan and updates it. There's a demographics of the county so we can better understand different aspects of what we may be dealing with according to different types of emergencies and disasters. It lists the types of disasters that are most common for the county and discusses assumptions that need to be considered as the planning and response happen. Then it covers the concept of operations, which are the procedures, resources, coordination structures, and phases that the county uses during all disasters. Financial management is also in the SEMP, which is a big part of what needs to be addressed during disasters. Then the roles and responsibilities of government and organizational and agency partners who work with emergency management before, during, and after disasters is in there. And at the end are the appendices with different forms and resources to support the SEMP planning. We will show you some of the pages within the SEMP. The picture on the left shows that all disasters start local, but depending on different needs and triggers is when the SEMP is implemented. The picture on the right shows the phases of the concept of operations for all partners of the emergency management process. The top left shows what the EOC may look like according to what type of event is happening and who should be in the EOC. The bottom left gives examples of when the SEMP should be activated. The page on the right is just the start of some of the facilities that emergency management uses as part of the emergency management process in the emergency management phases mentioned before. The SEMP defines who staffs the Emergency Operations Center, or the EOC, and what the responsibilities are of those who are there and the partners that emergency management will work with. This shows all of the emergency support functions and what their scope is and what county government department or certain private entity is the lead for each of these ESFs. The ESFs provide the EOC structure for coordinating a response to a disaster based on different functions. The purpose of ESF is to coordinate and provide life-sustaining resources, essential services, and programs for responding to the needs of the whole community during a disaster. ESFs are the EOC is how the EOC is organized so that all areas can be addressed during response and transitions to recovery. This shows just some of the types of notifications that TCEM uses as part of the SEMP. The SEMP gives direction on disaster declarations. A declaration of a disaster allows for a city to enact certain privileges because it has declared a disaster and can ask for certain helps and resources because of the declaration. Because all disasters start local, all cities must first take on the event. But if they cannot do all that is needed or need help with resources, then they apply for a disaster declaration. The same applies to the county. If they do not have all the resources or help needed to handle the event, they apply to the state with their own declaration. And if a disaster is severe enough, the state can ask for it to be federally declared a disaster so they can receive federal assistance. Certain parameters must be met before even considered to be federally declared. So not every case is declared federally, so not every disaster has FEMA coming to help with the disaster recovery. Therefore, the local jurisdictions need to plan how they will handle the financial burdens of disasters and emergencies. Each city must make plans of how it can respond to their own needs according to the circumstances of their own community. Just like there are emergency support functions, there becomes a point where recovery takes over instead of it being all about response. Then recovery support functions are needed to keep making sure the recovery process is handled properly and thoroughly. Recovery does not happen immediately. Recovery takes many months and often years, depending on the circumstances. Recovery is addressed briefly in the SEMP, but more detail about recovery is in the County Disaster Recovery Plan. The SEMP also addresses the policy positions and the financial management that need to take place during a disaster. This is separate from the EOC and response part, but is in conjunction with all that is going on during response and recovery. We're finally at the end of the SEMP, the appendices. This is the extra resources that support the SEMP process and help all organizations understand how to respond and why response in certain ways should be done. There's an overview of the county. Then the authorities and references part talks about the laws and why we have these plans in place. The hazard analysis talks about the hazards within the county and the likelihood of them occurring. And the transition from ESF to RSF graphic is helpful. It also has the lifelines, which FEMA now uses, as well as the state, to report on the status of how a community is recovering. The federal assistance programs are the programs that the federal government uses to aid communities and governments when a disaster is federally declared. It is important to understand what is needed and how it is decided for these programs to happen. The acronyms and definitions are very useful because emergency management and government operations are always full of them. And this is a very handy reference to remember what some things are and what those letters stand for. One of the most helpful appendices in the SEMP is this transition graphic that helps show the ESF transition to the RSFs and what lifelines they belong to. So when is the SEMP used? Well, in most every major event or disaster that the county may have, or every major emergency where a city needs help from the county, every natural, technological, or man-made disaster, the SEMP is used. It is even used during the preparedness and mitigation phases as references. And it is used to help in recovery also. It is guidance for all the phases, as it has a lot of great information on direction and who is supposed to do what. Does the SEMP mean a full staff is needed all the time? No, but the guidance of the SEMP is always at the forefront of whatever event is happening, even on planned events, and it is utilized during preparedness and planning. The SEMP is the document that guides everything, but it can be improved upon. How do you think it may be improved upon and be made better to guide during disaster? Of course, as all of us become more aware of what is in the SEMP and become trained according to the SEMP, we can work on delivering the objectives more effectively and get training we need to deliver more effectively. When all those that are involved learn their roles and the roles of others, that will help the SEMP to be better and become the guiding document that helps response and recovery go better because each person, organization, business, agency, and department know how to work together and work toward the common goals of the response and recovery. Also, learning about the ESFs and the EOC and knowing and understanding the capabilities of Web EOC will help not only in response, but making this SEMP run the way it is supposed to. When a disaster happens, one of the most important parts of information is the disaster assessment element. It helps emergency management and those that are planning how to respond know what they are dealing with and how to better handle the situation. When we receive data from the assessment, it helps to better know what ways we can improve the process of planning and implementing the SEMP. Also, understanding the recovery support functions will help too. When we look at recovery as our main goal and how we want recovery to look, then we can respond better and more effectively. When we work at looking at recovery in the now as respond to in the later, we'll deal with it when it comes, it actually helps the whole community be a better, more resilient community. AAR stands for After Action Report, and IP stands for Improvement or Implementation Plan. After any disaster or exercise, an after action report should be written to highlight the lessons learned and the gaps that were encountered. An improvement or implementation plan is a plan to implement those lessons learned and how those gaps will be filled in the future so that those same issues don't arise again. These help the SEMP become a better document for all those that use it. Also, having exercises helps to improve the SEMP. TCEM is resolute about having training and exercises to help partners, departments, cities, and agencies understand their roles and understand the SEMP so that the response can be better and help the community be better in their response. This is a list of some of the ways exercises can happen. We have done workshops and games. We are doing tabletops and working on holding a functional exercise next year in June of 2025. Lastly, the annexes also help the SEMP to be better because they are more specific about specific issues that arise during disasters. The annexes are more detailed about certain roles and certain issues that come up in certain ways. Emergency management has been working on gathering all the annexes and formatting them so they align with the SEMP and coordinate and support each other better so all those who use them will benefit from the knowledge in them and not just as something that will sit on a shelf and never be referenced. Let's talk about all those annexes. The first one is ESF 5, Emergency Management Information and Planning. This annex guides TCEM in its processes and guides the EOC direction, as well as how to deal with the mutual aid and what responsibilities others have in the emergency management world. It covers the EOC general actions and goes over the essential elements of information, which is how emergency management makes situational reports and makes its plans to support the response of the disasters. Emergency management is not the response. It is the support to the response. It helps coordinate all the cogs of all that has to happen during a disaster. It is also the department that reports the lifeline information to the state, and everything that emergency management does is to work toward recovery. Sure, in a major disaster, you cannot start on recovery right away, but thinking about recovery and what needs to be done can be started before anything happens. And that is part of ESF 5. The severe weather annex is probably the most common of all the annexes that will be assessed and used because we have severe weather every year at different times of the year, at different levels in different parts of the county. This annex has the information, just like the SEMP, about the introduction, the scope, the objectives, and who maintains the plan. It has situations and assumptions about the Tooele County and about the weather hazard specifically. It talks about the coordination with the agencies and partners during severe weather events and also has timeframes for specific ESFs for specific weather-related hazards. The appendix has information about event planning and the triggers for when an event ends, when to end an event. It has mutual aid job aids, resource request information, and has details about drought funding mechanisms and public notification tools. Next to severe weather, wildfires happen every year in Tooele County. This annex, like all the others, has a purpose and scope and has situations and assumptions. It addresses wildland interface considerations and goes over the roles and responsibilities of the departments and agencies involved. In the annex, debris removal is covered, as well as re-entry for citizens and recovery, which always takes time and many steps when it comes to wildfire. Disaster assessment is a key element in the declaration process. Until a community knows at least somewhat the extent of the damage and the scope of what they are dealing with, it is hard to know what the resources are that are going to be needed. So, a disaster assessment of the area helps to bring a bit more clarity to the situation and helps the officials to make plans on what the next steps may be according to what the damage is. The assessment annex covers how to go about doing disaster assessment and the programs and organizations that can help in the task and to help in the declaration process with the sample templates as well as press release forms and damage assessment forms. Usually, with most disasters, there is some element of needing to remove debris. This annex addresses the logistics and tracking of resources used, as well as forms and checklists needed as the EOC works with different companies and agencies to clean up the different forms of debris. In many major disasters, one of the biggest failures seems to be communications. And it usually happens for various reasons, whether there is a plan or not. This annex is written to help alleviate some of those issues, but there is no guarantee that all will work perfectly. But having different types of communication means that there will be other ways for communication, and that is what this annex addresses, as well as the roles and responsibilities of different departments and agencies. Information is always the most important commodity during a disaster. Correct information is even more important, so this annex addresses ways to make sure the public is kept well informed and gives direction on a joint information system and, if needed, a joint information center. Credible public information is often the very key to help a disaster run more smoothly, as it will help people to do the correct actions that officials need them to take. Collaboration with various agencies and organizations is key, and a PIO works with the public to help them to see the best clear picture, to know how to prepare and respond properly to disasters and emergencies. This annex has information about our mass notification policy, information about actions to be taken by operational timeframes, and in the appendix, there are templates and suggestions about how to communicate with the public in the best possible ways. ESF6 is a very broad emergency support function that covers all things people and their needs. This annex is the basis for the beginning of the roles and responsibilities of ESF6 and the responsibilities by phase for each of the agencies usually involved. This annex covers a little bit about the sheltering, which is often the most utilized function of ESF6. Other capabilities are addressed in other annexes. The elements of mass care and ESF6 are sheltering and feeding. Those are addressed in the mass care annex. The animal needs in a disaster are addressed in the Tooele County Animal Emergency Response Annex. All of the annexes address access and functional needs, but the annex described here goes into more detail about exactly what access and functional needs and vulnerable populations are, and what are the functional needs and resources that need to be addressed. A commodity point of distribution, or CPOD, is a place where supplies and goods are handed out to people in need after a disaster. This annex covers what one is, how to set one up, the trigger points that would possibly constitute having one, as well as the roles and responsibilities of not only the agencies and departments, but those that would help run the CPOD. The last annex is geared toward recovery, but this goes under the mass care realm because it also is about helping people get the resources they need to take care of their needs after a disaster. This annex describes the roles and responsibilities, as well as how to set up a multi-agency resource center, or MARC, as well as forms and guidance about working with the federal government should a disaster resource center be set up through them if there were a federally declared disaster. All of these in the mass care world need help from volunteers and resources from other places to help with addressing needs, which leads us to the next annexes. In the EOC for Tooele County, ESF 17 is focused on resources of people and stuff through a volunteer effort. The greater county community is always willing to help in good ways, but there needs to be order in how it is done. This is where these annexes come into play. These annexes discuss how and when and why donations will be accepted, and how volunteers will be utilized, and how the hours will be kept track of, and the people working will be briefed on being as safe as possible as they volunteer. There are not enough responders and even department workers to be able to handle some of the issues that will come up in a disaster. That is why Tooele County Emergency Management has developed a response group that is a 501c3 organization that can take in cash donations, which is always the best way to help survivors, as well as put people to work as volunteers where they are needed. Tooele Response utilizes these two annexes to guide them in the operations needed when they are called upon. ESF 8 is another one of those really big emergency support functions. This annex covers not only public health, but also the supplies and equipment needed for people and animals, big and small. It also covers the hospital coordination, as well as transportation and patient care. It covers food safety and security, behavioral health, mental health, water, wastewater, and solid waste disposal, and mass fatality management, and anything that the public will need relating to health issues. Emergency Support Function 10 covers hazardous materials, which is a big deal since hundreds and hundreds of trucks go up and down our roads and rails every day carrying different types of hazardous materials, not to mention the fixed sites that has hazardous materials here in Tooele County. This annex addresses all of those scenarios and what the response direction and control will be, and who is involved in the response, and how the public will be made aware, and what resources are available not only to responders but citizens. The annex has forms and reports for reference. We hope an active threat will never happen in our area, but it is always best to have a plan, so if one ever does, there are protocols to follow, and response is safe, practical, and guided by best practices from previous scenarios. This annex covers the active threat phases and how coordination should look and what roles and responsibilities each entity must support law enforcement in their efforts toward a recovery with hopefully a good outcome. The Family Assistance Center is a center that comes from a need after an active threat, sometimes, or a mass casualty or mass fatality incident, which those annexes are just next. The Family Assistance Center annex describes that what one is and its functions and the responsibilities of the organizations who help run it, and also give directions for all the branches and groups that could be needed in a family assistance center. The annex gives an example of a layout and has checklists and forms to help with logistics and administration of a family assistance center. It has information about public information helps. This annex addresses reunification and other issues when an active threat or mass casualty or fatality happen. This one isn't always needed, but it is a huge undertaking. So it requires guidance and direction as well as some planning in advance. These two annexes kind of cover the same thing, yet a mass casualty goes one step further when there are deaths to deal with. So ESF 8 has a bigger role to play, as well as there is a larger federal role, and these annexes give direction on how coordination with all the partner agencies and organizations that are going to be needed during an event that would have such things as mass casualties and or fatalities. There are logs and forms to use and guidance on how to keep the scene safe for those that must triage, treat, respond, and transport, and handle the potential deaths. The transportation plan is still being worked on. This plan is a big portion of resources that are needed during disasters. Often there may be a need to evacuate large amounts of people, or there needs to be certain roads closed off or bridges are down, so there needs to be maps developed for the public to know how to get around while repairs from damage are being done. The county deals with transportation issues every single day, but add a disaster in with those regular disruptions, and a plan is needed to help coordinate and find the proper resources needed to recover. This annex helps in finding and providing resources used to support transportation of evacuees, personnel, equipment, and materials and supplies. This annex focuses on prioritizing and coordinating and supporting the prevention and preparedness phases for the response and recovery phases within the limitations of the ESF1 agencies. Although earthquakes do not happen often, we all know that they can happen. We had one happen back in 2020. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, and luckily some things did happen didn't go as bad as they could have gone. But knowing what we know now has guided this annex and guides each of the ESFs and those doing disaster assessment and those working in the EOC to make good priorities and decisions about situations and work better toward a better recovery outlook by working with partners and organizations, as well as agencies and departments, to better coordinate the resources needed where and when they are needed. Recovery is what the end goal is after each disaster and emergency. In major disasters, recovery can take years. There are different functions that take place during the recovery stage, and this plan goes over all the recovery support functions and talks about the lead agencies and how they will guide their recovery support function with their partners. It also covers what milestones and what partners and community members should do to help in the recovery process, because recovery should not be done in a silo. It should be community driven, and when done right, can build a better, more resilient community. There are job aids and checklists and planning guides in this plan and should be read way, way before any disaster ever happens by everyone who may be involved in a disaster response and recovery. So we all have an idea of what to shoot for in the process of response because, as we said earlier, recovery is always on the mind as the goal, even during response. It isn't done, but it is thought of and planned for even before an incident happens, which brings us to the last plan. Pre-disaster mitigation is the beginning stages of a disaster. It is the hope that there can be steps to mitigate certain things so that it won't be possibly worse. Thinking about what may happen beforehand and thinking about what can be mitigated beforehand and even after a disaster will help the response and recovery go much better because of the process of planning and thinking through the strategies and goals and methodologies to make things better. This plan must be done every 5 years, and we are in the process of working with all of the cities to update and improve upon this plan from the work that has been completed from the events that we have had in the county, and also the lessons learned from other areas of the state. Mitigation is a huge part of the preparedness step in the emergency management cycle. It helps to understand capabilities of the agencies and organizations and the cities itself. Each city and unincorporated area is different and has different issues to deal with, but the principles are the same, and working together and planning together are key to making response and recovery happen more effectively. We have covered a lot today. Tooele County Emergency Management is committed to help the county respond and recover with coordinated efforts and partnerships that will make response to whatever happens in the county worth the planning time of meetings and trainings and exercises and reports and all those things we don't like to think about but need to, because we all know that it is not a matter of if, but when. Thank you for your time. These plans and annexes will soon be available for you to read and access. We just wanted to give you an overview of all the plans available and let you know about the resource these plans provide. If you have questions, contact Tooele County Emergency Management. Thank you.